My name's Jackie.
Sure.
My Zulu name is Nobela, given to me by my Zulu father, Baba Credo Mutwa, who I've had the privilege of being with and living and learning with throughout my life, which truly was a gift for me. It is part of my being, my home, where my spirit and being are present. And so my knowing at the age of 4 was to be able to communicate with spirit and with spirit. Because joy is such an essential part of our lives. There's so many happenings that occur along our journey, and we're always growing and therefore healing. Because each time we transition or transform, we are in that immortal journey. We're just a soul that's in a body, but we are not bodies that have souls. And so for me, that's a very distinct difference. So I began to work with Spirit, who guided me through the journey in transforming and growing myself, because for me that's essentials to remain humble in spirit always. And through that journey, you know, it is an honor to be able to represent spirit. We all do in our own ways, but it's to live with spirit, so that there is a unity and a synergy and a harmony. There's so many different levels of dualities that we do live in, but unless we learn to self-master, to know that spirit is holding us in those lessons, and we are unfolding in that, always in the universal laws, so we honor and respect all of life, and we honor the path of life. So it's not just Father, Son, or Ra, it's also Mother Earth, and another one of my spirit teachers, Maria Xhosa, who was one of the great ancestors, who is all about Bayeti and the great king and the path that we all walk toward. So through my African roots, I was born in Africa. For me, it's very much part of how I live and breathe and be. We all are at home on the earth. We're all children of the earth. For me, Africa has a particular significance, and I'm privileged to be able to live here and be able to work with her heritage. You know, we are all inheriting not just what we have as our ancestral and physical human beings as we are, walked through and lived and really walked our talk, which the lions roar their talk, they roar their truth, their spirit, they speak. So it's about retaining the purity of truth and returning back to that essential core in who we are. Mm-hmm. And so it's about realignment of who we are. So through that journey, I created various modalities and support systems for people to be able to align to and work with, but as unique human beings. Because I found, you know, there were so many modalities out there, but I found that very few people were talking about who you are as a soul, who you are in the embodiment of that, and also your own unique journey, because we all have our own blueprint. So I call that our divine natural ability. So from the acronym of the DNA, it's our divine natural ability. Mm-hmm. And it's our return to nature to be able to nourish the roots of our being, or the spirit within us, that then creates harmony. And so that has taken me through many journeys that I've formalized various levels of educational training in. But education isn't anything unless you live it. You know, I always believe you can have a book on the shelf, but unless you know the meaning of every word and you've lived that and loved that, there's so much to be able to bring alive. So really in an envelope, that's what I've been doing for many years now.
So, you know, I'm coming to understand that you've been so exposed to a lot of, you know, especially through your association with Baba Credo, you're exposed a lot to the traditional African practice of spirituality, and I'm sure that also has come with its own experiences, lessons, and challenges within itself. I wanted to first ask, before we get into that, how did you come to meet Credo Mutwa, and how did you come to be a student of his?
So when I was 4 years old, I was in a community where, first of all, I was encouraged to be able to speak about the visions and experiences. And through that unconditional support, my family, who's very open to spirit, and my parents really encouraged me to be all that I am. And so for that I'm very grateful. And my very first teacher, who actually brought one of the first gateways of encouraged enlightenment in the Western world as such, into South Africa. Her name was Anna Crawford. She began teaching me, and it was as if I remembered it all. It just was a part of my being, like the Akashic Records. There wasn't a separation. And through her I was introduced to Baba, and through that journey, initially he wouldn't say a lot. He would simply be, and I think he had, like the sun he is Ra, he is the great king, and he would observe and be, so we'd communicate telepathically and energetically, and that happened for many years. And he encouraged me always through the heart of the sun, and led me on many different journeys through that. So it wasn't about what I had to learn. I think all of us have to learn to remember what is ageless and eternal, and that is divine wisdom. So we're all different and unique, so we have different experiences with that. One thing I must say about Baba is that he always retained the purity of that wisdom. No matter what circumstances occurred around him or the people that were with him, he retained his true sense of being. And that really I admire so much, because the world can be a place where there's so many conflicts and dualities and shaping that occurs. But throughout it all, he kept his pure heart. So for me, he really embodied Bayeti, the great king, and calling the king. And so that called me to work with the White Lions. And we began that work over 30 years ago with a sister of mine, Linda Tucker, whose spirit mother is Maria Clausa. And we began to create a community in which the natural living order of the divine, the high plan on earth, would come to be. So that was an incredible journey, and through that journey, Baba inspired me to listen to what Spirit was guiding me to do, and I embraced that. And through that, we began to work with the journey of unifying, which is aligning with the unique love that you are, because when each of us do that, our stories, whether it's the stories of Africa, the stories of our soul, the stories of life, which have always been spoken by word, by the sound, by the lion, by the roar, it is about co-creating with the word of life. And so we began many different projects. One of them was called Gathering of the Earth Tribes, and in order to bring unity, for example, into South Africa, we began a program called Gathering of the Earth Tribes. And we invited 12 different traditional leaders from across the world. And I was explaining to Baba then that I'd had these visions about the original Valley of the Kings. And he said to me, never silence your voice, just ask Spirit to guide you. So we did preparations and ceremonies and rituals, and a few days later, a person from the academic world contacted me to say, I've heard that you know about a particular area called, he called it Rhinostocopi, rhino's head. And he said to me, what does the rhino mean? And I said to him, well, in true teachings, where all the records of life are held, which is in Africa, It's the spine of the world. It's the upright presence and spirit of Gaia, Mother Earth. We call it the Nylanic energy. It's the Nile River, which matches the upright spirit that runs through Africa and the upright spirit that lives within each of us. And it's that divine alignment. One of my teachers, Asti, speaks about alignment. It's the a-lion meaning, for us to restore back to the original kingdoms of divine order. So this academic person said, would I be willing to show them one of the valleys? And I said, okay. So we were walking around this particular area. And of course, science is always very curious about trying to match what spirit is. And so he picked up a pebble and he said to me, how old is this pebble? So I just connected with the spirit of this living being, because stones have energy and consciousness, and they tell stories about the earth. So I gave him a number, and he laughed, and we left, part our ways, and he came back and he said, you are probably about 2 weeks out. So I said, well, it wasn't me. This is about nature speaking. This is about spirit speaking. And I said to him, and furthermore, the original guardian of this valley is Ra, and he should be rightfully returned here. And so for a time, Baba lived in the original Valley of the Kings in Galisburg. And he restored what was meant to be there through his work and with his wife and his family, who are always in that divine support. And so through that journey, they began to do archaeological work there. And they said, no way that there's going to be an Egyptian mummy here. So of course it's Ra Baba's family and roots, and of course he found it. And of course it was recognized. But it's always, like a lot of our journey in Africa, it's always recognized by the West. It's not recognized because it is that authentic living library. Mm-hmm. Another example was, Baba's trip, which when he went to London and he went into the original museum there, all the original African artifacts are somewhere down on the 14th floor below the ground. They're all in boxes, and these artifacts actually belong to Africa. They were worn by men and women of African origin. We know that those are sacred. They're blessed with prayers. They're blessed with family bonds, and so he was incredible in his plea to return some of those sacred artifacts. He wasn't successful in all the ways, but then that led to a project where that knowledge was then returned to men and women of Africa, that their right to be able to create by their own living design, their divine natural design, and their own blueprint. So the other thing that we did in the Gathering of the Earth Tribes was we took several of the indigenous leaders across South Africa, blessing various sacred sites. And Baba was, endorsing the return of sacred sites that had belonged to Africa. And some of them, like the big footprint, which is on the way to Eswatini, one of my favorite places, we had to, for a long time, through people who offered to assist, create legislation that the King's Throne, which is one of his places, and the original people on the earth, the footprint, were recognized as heritage and treated as such in a reserve. Because a lot of our sacred sites, we find that they are not even acknowledged. They are built over, people litter over those areas, they walk by them with no regard to what those sanctuaries really mean. So that's just an example of some of the work that I did with Baba. Another example of the Nylanic line is like the water in our spine. It's like the Nile River, the blueprint that holds our spirit, our kundalini, our chi, our or our energy. And that energy is sacred. It lives in Africa. The waters in Africa are sacred. So like people will say, if you drink the water from Africa, you miss it forever. Because it really is. It's like drinking from the heart of Mother Earth. And, another one of the sacred areas is in the Tsimbavati, where we have the White Line, home of the White Line Global Trust, which is a protection trust for the Maletsi tribe, Maria Xhosa's tribe, and the original guardians of the king. And we have worked there creating the original Akiru, which is bringing the hidden line to life in alignment with leadership across the world. So it's my belief that Baba Mutwa was destined to be leader of Africa as Ra. He was known as Hermes, he was known as Thoth, he's been known as a great many beings. And this lifetime he really had to be humble and teach people about the vision. That is why he was the most magnificent artist, amongst many other things, because he retained the heart of joy, so he could always create. And when we're creating, we're not in a problem mentality. If you can create, you're in a solution. So he wanted to build the living library in Africa, and he wanted to return the vision because people weren't listening. He was ostracized from his own community for returning truth. He was isolated. He went through all the human tribe disengagement processes. But he retained who the essence of him was, and he learned to speak through his vision and through his creativity. So on Tuesday is his birthday, and in the first cycle of release, when the body leaves the earth, we call it Ana Yamuna. Ana is the energy of the divine alchemy, and when a person has passed and left their body, they are now living alchemy. They're living in other states of consciousness, Ana. And Yamuna is the sun that embraces both the rising moon and the setting moon. So it's about the goddess of Mother Earth and giving thanks to Baba's mother who bore him to us. So his role as Yamuna in the first cycle of his celebration and his release, in him being able to leave his body, even though he suffered, he would speak with his eyes, he would speak with his heart, he'd speak with his spirit. He didn't need to talk. He only spoke for those who needed to hear because they didn't know how to listen from their inner self or their own spirit. And, his passing through his physical dis-ease, where he was out of ease, because he took to heart all the hate and all the shadows of people's spirits, literally in his body, so his joy began to diminish. But he always kept the truth of his spirit. So I really want to honor that about the Ana Yamuna in who he is in that celebration. And really, we honor that through returning spirit to from the shadow into the light, from the body into eternity. And we wear that for a period of 21 days. So it's 10 and a half days before and 10 and a half days after. And we honor that journey. And 21 is always the symbol of the sun that's been born. It adds up to 3, which is Trinity, which is the great Ankh. So when Baba left his body, he transformed into the Ankh, into the divine kingdom. So his spirit still governs Africa. Here's the Nile. Here's from east to west, from rising sun to setting sun. And there's the divine. He went through the all-seeing eye. Also gifted to me from a lion who gave himself to Baba. And he gave himself. And this given to me on the initiation of the Gathering of the Earth Tribes in 1994 when we worked together. It's the hand of the divine that always reaches out. The divine journey is about always keeping your heart open, having the courage to love despite what is occurring. So that is one of the first aspects of Baba Mutwa that I would really like to acknowledge, and all the people who lived on his journey to make that, and all the beings. But Ra really was meant to be the leader of Africa. He would have brought a lot of unity and peace and harmony. You know, he was the person that the governments were speaking to during any kind of disease or disharmony in our countries through Africa. He was always the man, the high Sanusi, who would be the council. And yet his name was never heard.
So can we talk about that for a minute? I'd like to get your understanding of why it is, looking at the state of Africa and the state of the African mindset today. What is your understanding of why it is that he was rejected as a truth bearer and a truth bringer?
So one of the things about truth, love creates light. Light is enlightenment. And when we're enlightened, we know truth, because it's in alignment with the universal laws. And that is what truth is. But not everybody wants to know truth. People often want to hold on to their perceptions or their conditions or the safe frames that they've been taught to survive in. But living is different when we go into thriving, when we go into really living the full life, being alive, all being stars. We all come from the heavens. We're born to shine. So how are we shining that love and light and living that truth? So in those frames or conditions where society had deemed those the norm or deemed those what was meant to be, even in the sense that High Sanusi spoke out about truth and shared the sacred ways with people. A lot of people felt threatened by that because they didn't know what would happen if people worked with that truth in a way which wasn't in alignment with respect and honor. One of Baba's favorite greetings was, "My honorable ones." And he would always honor the divine in another. And truth is about honoring that in dignity and in love, that each person has the right to know truth. So the misuse of power is something that we see in modern times, if we want to call this modern. And so we see people misusing information for their own means and gains, where we are taught and we know that we do what we will and harm none. And what we do is not only for the good of us, it's for the good of everyone. And that means plants, animals, sentient ones, and crystal kingdom. Humanity tends to think that they operate alone. So we do what we will and harm none, and we do and be good for the good of everybody. So that is truth. And Credo knew that the time for the birth of truth had come, where the great kings of the One would be returning to govern our continent, Africa, and lead the rest of the world. If we don't govern from truth, then we're not going to create peace. So the combination of truth and peace we call truce. And Baba's spirit is all about truce, and he was always there to mediate and divinate and guide about the way forward in truth. So when truth gets exposed, people's egos or personalities emerge, which is, I need to be right and you need to be wrong. And so what it did do is it opened up the divide that was already in all of the communities across the world. You know, Baba spoke about South America and Africa and Australia being one. He didn't see the world as separate. He saw Mother Earth as one. And he spoke about the fact that in that division that humanity is governing by ego and by power, we need to return truth so that we, as he says, we go back to the power of love, not the love of power. So we're seeing that knowledge being misused. We see it being used for personal gain. You never see the great lion living for personal gain. He governs in governing himself and mastering himself. He governs all the kingdoms. So do we live our lives that way? Do we live with the patience of all of the natural kingdoms? Or is it all about dropping the ego, which truth asks us to do, and say, you know, we need to honor the source of love in you, in us, in myself, and if I don't do that, how can I honor it in you? So the truth of who we are has to come to be. And there's a time that truth must emerge. The time is now. And the time is about holding sacred what is true. And that is our roles as custodians on the earth. He knew that not everyone was listening to his truth. He knew that, so he created his art to speak. So he tried to reach people in that way. And in his journey, everyone wanted his power. They took his adornment that had been passed down through 333 different generations. It was stolen from him in Eswatini, off his neck, where he was naked and had to walk all the way back to Kuruman on his own, a man in his 80s. That is the level of disrespect. Humanity only wanted his power. They didn't understand that they had to create their own power of love. And he tried to teach them that. But that great blessing that was passed down over 333 generations to him, whoever has got that now doesn't have any power. It's the soul and the heart that gives the vessel true power of love. And so still, even in his complete violation and disrespect, he stood up. That is a man. That is the men of the world need to follow that pathway. The women of the world need to stand in the dignity of love. And so when society was afraid of his prophecies, they turned him away because it didn't suit their plan. And I'm not saying that we're not practical and logical and pragmatic, because we do live as responsible, our ability to respond to life, beings in this world. But truth came out and people didn't want to know. Some people felt that the sacred ways would be misused, and that their fear partly has come to be. But the truth always heals everything. And that's something about trusting truth. And that's where peace comes to be. So if Baba, as was destined, could have come into power originally, which one of our prior leaders, who is of a different rainbow body, asked him to do, but met with resistance from his own Zulu people. There's always so much jealousy about power and love, and Baba really had to fight that. But no matter that, he always stood in his heart. He stood like the most magnificent Lion King, which he is. You know, people talk about reincarnation and incarnation, and if Ra was Nostradamus and Hermes and Thoth and Baba Mutwa, well then why are we not listening still? The sacred knowledge is there. Thing about sacred knowledge is we have to open our hearts to hear it.
so true. That's so true. And I can tell from, a lot of the language and the terminology that you use that you were a true student of Credo Mutwa, because he also, he valued so much the sacred science of ancient Kemet and various knowledge systems that contributed to spiritual enlightenment. And in the Ubungoma space, because he worked very largely in the Ubungoma space. So you can kind of pinpoint students of his by the terminology that they're familiar with. What would you say, besides the value that he placed in knowledge systems like ancient Kemet, what, with that in mind as well, what are some other things that set him apart from other custodians of indigenous knowledge, would you say?
One of the vital aspects is he never said that he was the knowledge. He shared the truth of that knowledge. And that is what set him apart as a true leader. He didn't need to brag about who he was. He lived who he was. He lived his being, and he lived it in truth and peace. And that is the difference. Because a lot of people will talk about, well, I discovered this, and I know this, and I'm a master of this. Are you? Have you lived every single degree of initiation of that? Have you lived it where you can live it every minute and live it in love? So Baba's humility always was about being the vessel for truth.
So also, I'd really like to know some of your challenges that you personally faced being, a student of his, because I know, that you could be prone to, racism in this space, especially in the African spiritual space. What was that like? And what did you learn from those experiences?
So what it gave me an opportunity to truly embrace is that my journey was with my teacher. And that because I honored him and he honored those around him, I would honor them. And I lived by his walking his talk. It was about looking at the divine in another. And if another can look at me and only see my skin color or my hair, then I acknowledge that at least they see that. And I acknowledge them in love for acknowledging that I'm unique and that they're unique. And I hold them in love and light because I'm also learning and I'm also growing. And the more dissonance or mistrust that there is, the greater the heart that lives inside. So I witnessed a lot of hearts that were waking and opening. And I witnessed them in love. Because it's not for me to judge anybody. We are all going to pass on that circle of life at every point of our life, all of us. So if I'm walking in your shoes and you walking in my shoes, how do we love one another? How do we honor one another? Because we are all children of the earth. We're all children of the sun. So we celebrate what is unique, and I honor that in you, and I honor where you are in that journey.
I have a question about, because, Afro-Savvy is very, I reference African spirituality a lot because we speak mainly on African spirituality and holistic healing through African tradition.
Yes.
And it's very ancestrally centered. There's a whole lot of heavy emphasis on ancestors. We honor our ancestors, and but in translation, when translated to other, I guess, cultures or healing modalities, or in the historical context, it's ancestors are also referred to as guardian angels. We say that when we translate it to maybe Christianity in the Bible, that we'll then say that no, these are what what angels actually are, and then also referred to as just energy. What is your view and understanding of ancestral energy, ancestors, and your relation to, in terms of your interaction with that energy in your spiritual practice?
So first of all, our ancestors have formed everything that we are, these bodies. It is in gratitude to them I give thanks for my body. Their walk, their talk, their survival, their achievements, I thank them. So they are the past, they are the compost, they are the ground that I'm able to walk in and with at this time, and I'm always grateful. And they will come in different mediums. They will come exactly as you've said, through the angelic realms, the ancestral realms, through the spirit of the forms, of earth forms that have passed, beings who have returned to spirit and dropped the lower vibration of emanation, or man forms, emanation. There are all different forms of ancestors, and we honor each one of them in every level. And we work with them in order to listen to the wisdom of the ages, that we respect and honor the wisdom that they learned, so that we can be present in that. And then also, as you are present right now in the presence of them, your presence and your spirit and the lineage of your soul, because you also have a soul lineage. You don't only have a body lineage, you have a soul lineage. And that soul lineage is a group of souls, it's your group soul that you come through. And those beings are also part of your ancestors. And then we have spirit souls. They're part of the other aspect of your ancestors. We're the essence of the energy that formed the souls, that formed the ancestors, reside and abide. And so we work with every level, and we honor every one of those ancestors in our rituals and our prayers, in how we see the world. When you look into the world, you are looking through the vision of all of your ancestors that have formed the DNA that made your eyes. We do it consciously. We also walk in and with them in high regard for their spirit, and that they are still serving us and working with us and assisting us. So gratitude for me is an essential aspect of that. And living in gratitude each day is also honoring them with us. Ancestors are so much part of who we are. We also, they can see the way to our descendants. They can see what is up ahead. We know that the generation that you are now was formed from 3 levels of your ancestors. Your mental body, your thinking is formed from your great-grandmother. Your emotional body is formed from your grandmother. Your physical body is formed from your mother. The same on your father's side. So not only is consciousness formed from our ancestral DNA, the divine natural ability in us, but it is also shaping our thoughts and our heart. So we also know that you are now that 4th generation, and your descendants 3 generations from now will inherit the DNA of your thinking. Because there's a divine biorhythm to the co-creative template of life in our DNA. And if we observe it, we go back to the chemical principles, and we go back to Thoth and Hermes and Ra and their divine essential teachings that formed the building blocks of that in the essence, beyond time and space, before the beginning. We then know that those building blocks are not blockages, they support, they're levels that are encouraged, that create, that co-create, that build upon. In the conscious co-creative living, our ancestors, we co-create with them. Great Spirit, we co-create with. So we don't only have ancestors of a particular body tribe. We have ancestors that are global ancestors. And our souls talk to each other, and our angels talk to each other, and our ancestors talk to each other. We might be here having this physical conversation, but they're also conversing, connecting, and communicating. So living that path means understanding all those different levels. And the other aspect, which is also so beautiful, is the blessings of hindsight. Because after you've learned something, we have hindsight. And ancestors always give blessings of hindsight, often their own. And that leaves us with these pearls of wisdom.
You have, a lot of insight on some of our, greatest historical landmarks. And I wanted to get into, I know we have pyramids in Southern Africa.
Yes.
Because those are spiritually charged sites. So what are the benefits of those sites, visiting those sites, touching base and what is the spiritual value of those sites?
So a sacred site is a place where there are particular pathways of energy that run in the earth that align with various star systems, and where they meet on the earth, it is known to be a sacred site. Now, the original keepers of the guardians of truth, High Sanusi's light Baba, would then be responsible to bless those, initiate them, and open up those portals of energy. What it gives to people is healing. It gives the ability to transmute darkness into light, to reform who you are with the blessings of pure, unlimited flow of energy. And in those ley lines of consciousness, throughout South Africa, we have one of the most important spiritual ley lines, the 31.4 degree line, which we call the Nylanic line, the energy of the pure flow of the pyramids of consciousness, the 3 in 1, the pyramid. Okay, that's why 13 is also said to be a mystical number. 31 and 13, they are the great alignment of the pyramid consciousness, and then the 4 sides that come together. So most sacred sites have a particular construct of 31.4 degrees or 13.4 degrees. And the earth is shifting through different biorhythms. So as she evolves, we go, that the earth is over 5 billion years old. We've gone through different levels of evolution, and through that time, we call it formulas of energy that then construct and become matter in time and space. So there might be rocks, or there might be trees, or there might be, mostly it's all nature, because nature actually maintains and sustains those sacred sites. Look at a tree can breathe in carbon and change it to oxygen. Nature has this amazing ability to keep on sustaining life. So sacred sites are about living consciously, where you go into a sacred circle, where you would meet your guides, your guardians, your ancestors, your angels, or whatever, however it is that you name your beloved ones who are with you in spirit, and also around you, because sometimes you have ancestors who have reincarnated and are now with you physically. Okay, and then you would always ask permission to enter that sacred site. They're guardians to each of those sites. And sometimes they're crystal, animal, plant, humans. We all have different roles. And then, and you have your own role to be you in your life, and your own gifts that you've come to remember and to live. And one of your gifts, for example, communication, the ability to share truth with others, to honor truth, to bring wisdom, to return wisdom back to humanity. So those ley lines will then activate that natural potential in you. They open it up. Always remember, when you enter sacred site, first to ask permission and to always give thanks. You're entering into sacred land. You're entering into one of the temples of life. And sometimes those sacred sites were built for one person, like the stones of Enki, for example, were specifically and originally like the Stonehenge site, Stones of Enki is the southern point to the northern point of Stonehenge. They actually were placed at the same time on the earth in divine alignment by the great ancestors. And they would visualize through telepathy, through meditation, through dreams. They didn't need Bluetooth. They had their own. And then that site then is utilized and served and worked with for that reason. So, and we were saying earlier that those sites need to be made reserves. For example, Stones of Enki are in a reserve in Kapsuhoop, which means Cape Hope. But beneath there in the valley are 3 pyramids, and there was originally gold there. It was another one of the Valley of the Kings. It was the 3rd son of Ra, one of the brothers of Amenhotep, and his grandson, who originally lived there. And before that, we had ocean there. The whale bones have been found there. So, you know, our earth has a deep, deep history and is an amazing book of life. So when you enter onto the land, you've got to start looking, but really seeing. And those ley lines can be measured through conduits, they can be measured through rods, energy rods, they can be measured through pendulums, but our bodies are also pendulums. Our enzymes flow, our liquids flow, our thoughts flow, our hearts flow, so we also feel the rhythm. Sometimes you want to dance, sometimes you want to sing, sometimes you want to move around in clockwise or anti-clockwise energy. And the sacred sites bring that up in you. So each site has a particular story because they, like us, have a purpose. And when we go on those journeys of the sacred sites, what we do is we align meditation at each of the sites. We ask for what it is that your soul needs from that site, not what the person next to you thinks that you might need. What is your soul, your ancestors, your true blueprint and spirit guiding you to go through and metamorphosize, grow into, own, embody, enlighten, empower your being, so that you are fully present in who you are in this world. And each site is, imagine like the chakras and energy, or the Temshai chakras in our body, the energy of Kemet, Temshai, the energy of the divine flow of Chi, Chai energy in the home of our body. And we go to various sacred sites. So, you know, Western people say there's only 7 chakras. We as African people believe there are 12 chakras, and those are in divine alignment with the 12 sons of Ra. That everything about history is also directly aligned with the formation of nature. So we follow a particular cycle, and we then align with the sacred energy and the guardians of that site, with your guardians, and we consciously, with conscience, we grow, adapting, reforming, attuning, and we awaken the guardians at that site. And those sites gift to us amazing healing. And it's up to us to be open to receive it. If our heads and minds are already full about what we think we know, we can't receive the next dream. We can't receive the next awakening. So often we'll do dream time, we do journaling, we do sacred teachings, initiations, blessings, all through love, all through the power of love. So every person, no matter what their honoring of the Great Spirit Source is always acknowledged. And in fact, we've done work across the world. We've linked some of the sites in Africa to Ireland. I've linked some of the sites in Africa to New Zealand and Australia, and to Europe. So their energy doesn't just stop and start in one place. Universal energy is always flowing. It's always in divine expression. So our earth is also linked in those sacred sites. So that's what we do when we do the sacred sites. I call it a soul safari. It's about journeying with yourself and your soul consciously. And some of the places are in actual reserves, where we go to original areas where particular celebrations occurred, or women would go and give birth, particular places where midwives would be initiated and born into another level of service. So there are particular places to go. And often you'll find, like you asked earlier, what about alignment? How do you know when you're in alignment or not? How do you know that you've been to a sacred site as your life starts to change? Truth comes out, life comes out. You asked to resolve things in your circle of self, your family, you and your friends, your circle of who you are. It's an incredible experience. You actually come alive. And you're witnessing the life-giving energy from Gaia, our mother, who is all of our mothers, when we're walking in honoring that we're standing in part of her body. So imagine that her body is made up of energy centers and energy places, and you go to a sacred site and you stand in that. So it's like you're taken back into gestation to be with her and then released into the world again.
How would you say that it is that it translates in practical life when you're in alignment?
Oh, nice. So when you are holding the intention of whatever your goal is, your dream is, or that which you've been inspired to do and be and to live, it means that in every word and in every deed, you are in synergy with yourself and with others. So that means often that when you set an intention, whatever is not in alignment in you, that which you have completed, or a person, place, or thing which you have outgrown, you've grown to a different level, must fade away to make space for something new to come in. So alignment can often be rebirth, it can often be transformation, it can take you through the dark night of the soul, where you really have to figure out who you are and who you aren't. So sometimes we get lost in order to know the need to be home. And sometimes the more that we're home, we know that we don't want to be lost. It can often bring on physical dis-ease and physical disharmony, where that divine alignment needs to come back into balance. So a dis-ease is saying you're out of alignment with your body. You're out of alignment with the emotions or the stress that created that disease. So it's time to reform, to reconnect, and to transmute, to make space for the next aspect of growth that you are. Sometimes it can bring in great shadow, because the brighter your light, the more hate you can experience, the more aggression or violence you can experience. Look at what's happening all over the world at the moment. The greater the light's becoming, you put a light on in a dark room, you can suddenly see everything. So we have to start sorting, we have to start filtering, we have to start making choices. And what is a choice? A choice is the willingness to know that your intention is going to be actioned from the truth in yourself. So you can make a choice about wanting to be a better person, and the decisions that you make to be a better person are the smaller steps of that choice. So alignment means living more choices. It can also mean loss. A lot of people, when they're going through spiritual paths and they're becoming infused with the fission infusion process that our DNA goes through, learn to grow into something different, something more. Can be change of relationship, can be change of marriage, can be change of home, change of location. So what does light do? Light creates mutation. It allows that cell to continue to grow and expand. What is Father Ra Baba Mutwa's role on our earth? Mutate people of humanity, grow in the light, change, expand, reform who you are. So when light enters, the form will change and grow. And hopefully we do grow. You know, we always say that if we're not growing, we're not living. So alignment calls on us to be consistent with the courage of heart, with the truth of peace, and with a true fulfillment where power becomes love. And that is how you'll constantly check. But those stages go in phases. You might start with an emotional transformation. People call them crisis or drama. I call them opportunities. It's all energy. What do you want to do with it? So we go into aligning that part of us. And the other thing is, how would a lion give meaning to that? How would a leader give meaning to the experience that you're having? Would they take it personally and only live in ego? Or would a true leader say, wow, what is the gift and wisdom in this lesson? So alignment means being willing to live the lesson and the wisdom that's been gifted to you through the experience that you've had.